after Series 3, the studios closed in Manchester for refurbishment, so then we started coming to Shepperton.
So you kind of felt, whoa, we're coming up in the world, you know.
Got sort of nostalgically missed going up and down to Manchester for about, I don't know, 20 minutes, and then we got used to being in Shepperton. Some great advantages. We had the set-up all the time, which is great, so we could be much more inventive.
Made you feel like a movie star for a start. All of a sudden we'd gone from like BBC Manchester with all its facilities, where you could never get away from the fact that it was studio floor, you know. It's a bit like the original Star Trek ones, you know. There's so much you can do to build sets and things like that, but it always looks like a studio floor, you know. It's always flat and that kind of stuff.
You want to talk? Let's talk.
That made a really big difference. It was really good that they built the set and it was left up for the entire run of the series. So we were actually rehearsing on the set, which I would think in your average sitcom that's set in a house doesn't make any difference because you will recognise it. But there, because you know there were low doorways to go underneath and funny corridors that we'd rehearse, and we'd work out a lot of stuff. A lot of business was worked out on the set, which was great. So that when you were in there, you immediately knew where the cameras were going to be because they couldn't be over there because there was a wall, so you'd know that. So it was a great help for us. You know, I think we got up to speed on those episodes much quicker because we were in the set.
Curious. Extraordinary. What a truly copacetic piece of machinery.
We rehearsed on the set day in, day out, so where we'd have to rehearse in acting, in the acting rehearsal rooms, which not only a nightmare to get there, but like are just naff, you know?
Rather than visiting some set, it was like, you know, this is where we work every day. It was a bit different.
I much preferred the move to Shepperton and rehearsing on the sets and that whole thing.
Particularly things like Starbug, where you're in an enclosed space and there is a lot of things to do, and you know there's going to be explosions coming. And that's people like Peter Ragg were really good. You'd be doing the read through and you go boom like that right in your face, and you go, "Well, it's that close." Yeah, well, actually, it's going to be like here, boom. So watch that one. There will be sparks.
I was one of the ones who didn't take very well to the rehearsing on set because you always had people building this part of the set. And those big sound stages, of course, are either very cold or very hot because you put those heaters on, of course, then you've got the noise of that. And then it heats up incredibly, and then flick the switch, off the heater goes, and you can feel it tangibly getting colder, you know, while you're trying to rehearse. And then someone delivers something, someone comes with cables or whatever, you know. So I, to be honest, preferred the acting rehearsal days, you know.
They're not like you imagine film studios. It's like loads of aircraft hangars and sheds and stuff like that, and porter cabins and stuff. But it was good. You got to meet, you know, film stars in the canteen and things like that. Like Ralph Fiennes, I met him there. Mind you, when I was eating spare ribs and dribbling them down my face, so it wasn't that nice.
It just felt it was becoming much more of a professional outfit, you know.
Doesn't look good. We've lost the port engine, the starboard engine's packed up, the fuel line's severed, we're taking in water through the hull. We lost the landing jets, half the electric's out, and the elastic snapped on the furry dice.
There was a review that said that in Series 4, I guess, that my hair was too long for a computer. I think it was NME, I know it was a music paper, and they, what do they know about hair? Anyway, it wasn't like it was Hairdressers Gazette.
When I started doing Series 4 was when I first met the lovely Andrea, as she was then, Pennell, who I still call her Andrea Pennell. I can't, even though she's got married, I just like to think of her as Andrea Pennell.
With this new elasticated foam, was basically put it on like a balaclava. That if the foam had so much stretch to it that in theory he could literally slip it over his head, which cut down the time tremendously. I mean, it was from 7 hours there max. We could probably get it on. I could get it on in 50 minutes.
And a slightly different kind of design of the makeup, because the makeup in the first year was very slow to put on. Very slow. 5 hours, I think it took to stick on and paint. And what Andrew did was paint the mask before it was on my head, which basically saved an enormous amount of time for me sitting still with the sound of all over my head as it was being painted.
I remember when we first did Crichton, he was in makeup from 4:35 and it took 6 hours to, you know, to get it done.
Very cruel makeup woman but fair. So which actually helps, because it's odd, but when you're in that situation, when you're kind of basically your head is boiling in a bag, you don't actually want people to ask you if you're all right, because you're not all right. But nothing that they can do other than take the damn thing off is going to make you all right. So it kind of, you know, she knew that. She just had that. She worked with enough actors with a lot of weird makeup on to know, just ignore them or be cruel to them. It's much easier. So if I go, oh, that really hurts, shut up. You know, I was just going, yeah, all right, fair enough.
I saw more of him than I did of my husband for quite a long time.
Oh dear, what a terrible mess.
The year that that Paul Jackson saw my play in Edinburgh was also the year I met Judy Pascoe, my partner, mother of my 2 children. She was a stand-up comic and a writer and a performer and had been in, you know, plays and things. And Rob and Doug just said, but with a kind of knowing wry grin, you know, who do you think should play your girlfriend Camille? You know, what woman do you know who's stupid enough to put on a rubber head? And so I said, well, I could try and ask Judy, see if she'll do it.
Now, when he comes home tired, you know, what can she say now? 'Cause she knows what he's been through.
And I asked Judy, and she said, oh yeah, I'll do it, being Australian. She's up for anything. So she went and had her head cast and had her mask made. And then that was the downside of it for me, was up to that point, I think I got quite a lot of sympathy, you know, out of her ignorance of what it must be like. You know, she'd see me in that mask and go, oh, darling, that must be awful, oh, you poor thing. It was quite sweet. And once she'd had it on, why are you making such a fuss? No sympathy whatsoever, ever again. No matter how many times I put it on. Because she just said, oh yeah, it's not very comfy, but it's not that bad.
I have to say, when she did have it glued on, she did have a bit more empathy with him. Not for long.
It's just you have really amazing eyes.
Well, yeah, they're just the old 579s with the automatic 15 f-stop cornea. If you like, I could pop them out and you could borrow them. Heck, what a jerky thing to say.
Quite often, if somebody knows somebody else really, really well, it's difficult then for them to divorce themselves, if you know what I mean. It's probably the wrong term. But to pull themselves back so as if they're meeting each other for the first time. But they did it really well.
They did argue at one point, which was quite funny, seeing 2 masks arguing, you know, having words about, you know, who's doing the hoovering and the washing up and stuff.
There's a great photograph of Robert and Judy together in their heads. Apparently it's on their wall at home. It's a really good photograph. It's a good episode as well. I think she was really good.
We did try and have a kiss when we had it on. And I mean, the only way of recreating that would be if you both go to the dentist and have really heavy, you know, local anaesthetics when you're having your teeth done, and then try and kiss afterwards. You can't see anything. You don't know if you're kissing. You know, it's the weirdest sensation. It wasn't the most romantic kiss we've ever had, I have to say.
Ah, sir, you haven't met our visitor, Camille.
Hi.
I had my ex-girlfriend, Suzanne. She played my sort of love interest, but only after someone else had done it. Tracy Brabham, wasn't it? Who'd gone on to do loads of other things and become very successful. But for some reason, they didn't like what she did as my girlfriend. So I said, oh, well, when do you get my girlfriend in?
Like all the boys, they were looking for their ideal mates, you know, so she had to have elements that would appeal to Lister.
The ultimate mistake, you know, beginner's mistake of learning all hairlines and not learning any of mine. So, like, you know, so it was quite painful because every time I'd go to speak, she'd start doing another line, things like that. She'd not actually worked out that, you know, after her lines, I say something, and when I was saying something, then she'd cut over me with her next line. It was like, so it took quite a bit of working out to do it.
Can I get you anything? Or anything?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
I can't remember why the colour red. It was, I think because Rimmer's costume was green with a red shot colour. So we took the red, which was shot with green. So it was the same fabric, but it emphasised the red as opposed to the green. It just made them stand apart. And it did work so well on camera, which I think is what prompted Doug to ask for Rimmer red for the next series.
Everybody gets a girl, and what do I get? Myself. All the time. They never gave me a girl. They keep sort of dangling the girl in front of me and then taking it away. I think that's probably why the character's successful, though.
Hi, buddy. I'm the object of my own desire. Can you think of anyone more deserving? Well, if you put it like that, I guess you're right. Damn my vanity.
They did a rough edit to show in front of the audience. You know, it was rough, but I mean, it was like, may as well have been the real thing because it was so good. What they shot overnight, what they'd done overnight, and Paul came in the next day and was watching it and actually said, "How did you do that?"
Funnily enough, that wasn't that complicated. I mean, it looks complicated, but it was, logistically, it wasn't that tough compared to other things we've done.
I didn't see anything. I don't think I got any desires. Either that or my screen was foggy.
See, that's where I didn't win out, because I said, oh, can I have a boyfriend in Camille? But they didn't give me a boyfriend in Camille.
Mike Tucker, one of my assistants, volunteered to be inside it and actually move around and operate the snorkel and the eye, and become very attached to Robert.
When my son was about 4 or 5, he actually saw that episode on a videotape, and he really wanted to see it because it was Mummy in it as well. So he watched it and it was great. Oh, and there's Mum and that. Is that you, Mum? He couldn't believe it. He's only a little lad. Is that really you? And then he later on that day, he saw the whole episode, but didn't think anything more of it. And later that day, he started crying, and I said, "Oh no, what's the matter? You know, what's happened? Has little Johnny punched you?" And he went, "No, Mummy turned into a blob." And we just couldn't work it out. And he was really upset. Mummy turned into a blob with an eye that came out like that.
Camille was a sort of a great show. This pleasure girl who's all things to all people. You know, the science I've always found in Red Dwarf has always been, although it's a comedy show and it's some of it's tongue in cheek and some of it's spoof and some of it's pastiche, the science has always been incredibly sort of spot on.
Casablanca. What a movie. I must have seen it 1,000 times. Lister used to use it as part of my course. It's littered with examples of how lying can be noble.
To get clearance, I think, to show Casablanca on screen meant probably that we'd have been left with one flat, half a bazookoid and a shoe, budgetfully. So it's probably better to talk about it.
Now, in fact, I even did a film writing course where we analysed the script of Casablanca, so I knew that script really well. I mean, that was what was great about that episode. Probably I know the script better than the movie. I think I'd love to see the movie again. I haven't seen it for a while.
I'm not a massive fan of it, to be honest with you. No, of that era, there are other movies, you know, that I would probably sooner watch.
I sometimes wonder if I've ever seen Casablanca. It's one of those films that you feel you've seen without actually seeing it. That was also true about The Sound of Music, which I did eventually see in the sing-along of Sound of Music. But there's not being a sing-along Casablanca as far as I know. Play-along Sam Casablanca.
I hadn't seen it for a long time until we came to that episode and I watched it again. Well, I watched the pertinent bits again, yeah. And it reminds you of how good it is. It's being remade with somebody. I know.
Look, Casablanca. They've remade Casablanca. Philistines. I mean, how can you remake Casablanca? The one starring Myra Binglebat and Peter Beardsley was definitive.
My heavens. I'm human.
Yeah, but you lost your looks.
When we recorded DNA, when I read that, I was really thrilled because I thought, oh, wow, no more makeup. Crichton gets made into a human being, you know, fool that I was.
We always rehearse all week with Robert without his mask on and everything. So, you know, obviously I was used to seeing Robert without the mask being Crichton in rehearsals. But when I actually saw it on screen, I kept having moments of panic, going, my God, they've forgotten to put his mask on. You know. It happened to me a couple of times. I kept going, don't be stupid, you've seen him without the mask being Crichton. It's just on the screen. You just go, he hasn't got his mask on. What are we going to do?
As a performer at the time, you know, I never used to get that nervous going out in front of the audience. Because in a sense, I was very protected by that mask. And then, so it went from that extreme of being utterly covered. The only thing exposed to the air was my eyeballs. Nothing else had a breathing centimetre. And into that one where I had a surgical gown on with no back, which of course Craig constantly had to lift up to show the audience what I was wearing underneath, which wasn't a great deal.
He's very expressive indeed. And that was one of the great advantages of working with behind that mask, because his expressions could still come through all that foam and glue. And then to see him doing that unrestricted, it was almost like a caricature of the robot, which is bizarre, but great.
I have spoken to people who were disappointed, when they saw what Crichton really looked like. I think if there wasn't a review, there's certainly been like a comment in a fan website that said he's got a face like an uncooked pie, which I thought was particularly flattering.
The most wonderful thing has happened. We found this machine and it's made me human.
I can actually watch Red Dwarf. I don't find it uncomfortable to watch, because even though occasionally I hear a flat vowel coming out of Crichton's mouth, it's not me, it's another character, and I really enjoy the other guys. I love watching their work. I think they're very funny. So I can actually enjoy watching Red Dwarf, but that particular episode I can't look at.
Greetings, fellow human.
Oh, fellow human. How hollow those words sound now.
Crichton's idea of what the best dressed man would wear. And because Crichton has no idea, it was, elements that he'd read or seen or, in his photo memory.
I don't know what it was. It was a recently escaped game show host who got out of a special celebrity prison, I think. I don't know what the hell it was. It was a very bizarre suit.
So we ended up in this sort of rock and roll jacket with a leopard print collar and pink bell bottoms and some wacky tie.
Now, take a look at this. And this.
Brilliant scene. It was so well written, easy to play. And then, of course, the double Polaroid. I think the double Polaroid, I think it was someone's, the reaction from me, because someone photographed Mr. Wiggly.
And of course, he said over the years, various stories to various Red Dwarf fans, hey, it was Bobby. No, it wasn't. Wouldn't need two for Bobby. Wouldn't even need one. All those sort of things. He can't remember now. He thinks it might have been, because he was quite, I think his surprises, I think it may have been a photograph of some part of the human anatomy created by the art department, but I'm not sure what.
What about Spearhead 3? You can't just leave him here. He's got droid rot.
I don't need no bugger to look after me. I may be half-run with silicon physics. My voice units may be shot to buggery, but I don't need sympathy from the likes of him.
It was sort of such the antithesis of everything Crichton was kind of, open and optimistic and, let's get everything, keep everything clean. And to have the kind of the flip side, that was some old, endlessly moaning and complaining, 5 million year old spare head. It was really good fun to do. Very uncomfortable to do with your head stuck through a hole in a cupboard.
We would shoot obviously one set of Robert, and then he would reposition, and we'd shoot another set of Robert, and another set of Robert, and we'd wipe off obviously under his neck and put a shelf there so that they looked like heads.
You're a human now?
That's right, Spearhead One. Our wildest, most incredible dream has come true.
That was one of those ones where, you saw everyone else going home. Yeah, see you tomorrow, guys, yeah. Right, head back in the cupboard.
At some point in their lives, most people wish they were someone else. This has gone back years before the accident. Kachansky just finished with me and I was feeling really pony.
The Lister-Kachansky continuity did change, it's true. In the original series, it was a kind of peripheral relationship. They didn't really date. Then when we wrote the first novel, they did date. And then when we wrote the series, we kind of mixed it all up and contradicted ourselves, contradicted the novel and contradicted the TV series in a charming way, though, that we knew wouldn't irritate anyone.
You'd think he'd pine for something that he'd had and been taken away from him. But if there's pining for something that he never had, it's a much more difficult concept to sustain. So yeah, it was good that they sort of changed that continuity and sort of made it out that we sort of at least had a sort of a furtive fumble, as it were.
What have we created?
We've created the mutton vindaloo beast. Half man, half extra Indian curry.
With any sculpture, you have to base it on something. So we based this particular sculpture on, again, one of my assistants called Paul McGuinness, who is very tall, very thin. Paul sculpted this up himself and actually wore it for the purposes of the filming.
I don't believe I'm
running away from a psychopathic curried man.
When I say finished it the night before, I mean finished it the morning of being seen on camera. So Paul was extremely tired. It was extremely hot in that costume, and from time to time Craig was seen kicking the curry monster, saying get up, because it was Paul fast asleep on a table.
Did it work? Kind of. What you mean, kind of?
I mean, kind of.
We took elements of a Robocop and Lister and fused the two together, and that's why when you see that, he's got half a sort of armoured helmet and then half his cap, and you know there are bits and pieces of upholstery and then more Lister. So it was a fusion of the two.
I love that outfit, but I thought they were going to make me look really macho. Then they shrunk me to about that height. You know what I mean? It made me talk in a really scary voice.
Of course, lager. The only thing that can kill a Vindaloo.
It was actually moulded, and we did a cast of a helmet and his cap in the two. So he didn't wear just half; it was the whole thing.
And then they had this big blaster thing that they filled full of curry, and they fired at me. And that wasn't me acting falling over. That was me getting blasted off my feet. And all good fun, you know. I mean, you couldn't feel it because you had this big sort of fiberglass sort of Robocop shell suit sort of thing on. Not like a Liverpool shell suit, kind of a shell, crab-like, I meant.
How are you feeling, Mr. Lister?
Oh, much better, thanks, Crichton. much better.
There's so much about makeup that's not very comfortable, but sort of look. Actually, the more uncomfortable it is, I think the funnier it is somehow. Pain, pleasure.
One of the complexities of prosthetic makeup is the join between the human face and the rubber. And on Crichton, it's literally a small circle around my eye, so it doesn't take that long to cover that join up. Whereas with Craig, he had that huge headpiece that took hours. He was in makeup much longer than me that day. That took forever to do that. And he had to keep it on for a long time. And of course, the top of your head is really where you lose your body heat when you're hot. And he couldn't, because he was all cooking up his space mumps. I mean, that was so violent. He was so miserable with that thing on. He wasn't a happy bunny.
You know, I really do feel ill. You know, it's made me ill.
There was a sculpt, a mould, and then, as I say, the prosthetics, and then in sections and coloured. And then, as I say, we had pumps for wired in for the gunk.
That's where I really had sympathy for Robert Llewellyn, because it took quite a while in makeup to get that sort of space mump sort of head put on. And then they filled it with custard powder and piccalilli, and when it burst, oh God.
The basis was KY for the actual... It has a multitude of uses.
God, his head burns. Better. That is so much better. I feel good. Talk about a weight off your mind. I don't want to live. No, please, shoot me in the head.
It wasn't that gross because his head explodes out of vision. It's just the reaction of Danny afterwards. I mean, it's constructed well because it's a horrible, yucky pass on a bloke who really, really cares about his appearance. That's what's funny about it.
That's brilliant the way Danny does that. His head burst.
And that was so brilliant, his sudden appearance with it. You could feel that relief, couldn't you?
I mean, sure, you know, we could have probably blown his head up, but it would have been a tricky one.
A man so petty and small-minded, he would while away his evenings sewing name labels onto his ship-issue condoms.
So I think Robert does a super job in that. And again, a great piece. He must have read those lines and thought, oh, fantastic, sirs. You know, all that business about a mere joke of a man, a piece of sputum, all that sort of stuff. It was just fantastic lines, you know, to do. And all I had to do in the background was just look more and more outraged as each level of insult was piled on.
Objection! Overruled. That was quite a long scene that we shot in one big lump, the kind of courtroom scene, which was really nice to do. Because, you know, often you're doing scenes that are like 20, 30 seconds of kind of with some business or something, and that was like which is fine, but to have a big chunk, I don't know how long it is, but it's probably 7 or 8 minutes of kind of one long speech with lots of other little bits with, you know, the witnesses coming in was great. It was like a little play, it was like a miniature play, yeah.
Welcome to Justice World. Please take your clearance code and a prison officer ID.
Actually, I remember saying that to Ed. I said, I could talk in a low voice if you like, instead of lip syncing it. Because I could talk in a very low voice if you like. A bit scary, isn't it?
State line form infantry.
I think the man lip syncing actually fell asleep. And there was this strange noise in the studio and we couldn't work out what it was. And it was someone fast asleep slumped over a microphone somewhere. And they thought it was air conditioning or something like this. They were turning everything on and off and lights buzzing, and then they went, no, it's a bloke asleep.
Yo, matey, hit me on the head with this.
You have a long, quite static court scene, so you kind of want to compensate with that at the end of the show with a bit of action. And yeah, that was fun. That was a good piece of action, actually. That looked good.
With the simulant, we just had this thing that, you know, that was an extension, that he was half deformed, half beast, half man.
A lot of times, you know, I have to follow, obviously, Doug, and then I follow Howard. People don't usually follow me. I'm usually following them. I don't know why. I should change that. What's going on?
I probably ducked to avoid bazookoids. Who wouldn't? Ed got quite into all these little details as well. I mean, he used to think them up as well. Go, oh, you could duck here.
Action!
Those objects that I was getting hit weren't that bloody breakable either. They were really big, thick plastic, sort of wax things. I had lumps on my head after that, and did they look like glass vases to you? They didn't look like glass at all, did they? They were big, thick wax things, and he kept trying to crack them on my head, and some of them wouldn't even break.
Better late than never!
It's really hard to fall backwards without bending your knees to suppress the fall. You know, so you actually have to just stay there and fall like, you know, timber over. Yeah, and that's daunting backwards, even though you know there's a crash mat there. Psychologically, it's still daunting.
One sequence from that particular episode, which I really liked, was these boots that Peter Ragg, genius, invented.
Rat traps to involving the closing up of the tongues to trap the foot in the boot. Blue screened of the boots walking on their own. A material that one could explode. Then the actors walking around in them in a remarkably stupid manner.
I still look at that and go, yeah, that's so funny. They performed that so well, particularly Danny. Rob Grant gave me something that made me throw up about 180 times. And I just couldn't. I came into the studio, but I couldn't get my coat off without throwing up. It was very nice. It's lovely. Should have filmed it, really.
White Hole was the episode that Ed didn't end up directing. He directed the pre-record the day before, but I don't think he did. Well, he definitely didn't do the one with the studio audience because, how should we put this? Some people thought it was because his wife was having a baby, but it actually wasn't. It was, we had, well, I'll say food poisoning, yeah.
We'd had a child earlier in the week, who was born, and then at the end of the week I contracted Doug's and Rob's food poisoning virusy thing. Yeah, I just couldn't do it. I've never missed a studio or a day of filming or anything before, but it's difficult to do it when you're being sick.
Paul Jackson, who was effectively my first contact with Red Dwarf, had kind of moved on. I think he ruled most of Western Europe by then or something. He'd certainly become, you know, he'd become a sort of big TV executive, so he wasn't directly involved with the show, although he used to always come and see the recordings. He was still involved in it on that level. but he wasn't there on a day-to-day basis. And suddenly he turned up one morning when Ed, the director, Ed Bye, was ill, and it was an extraordinary thing because he had such a reputation, and he had been a director. He'd done The Young Ones. He'd been involved with a great many comedy shows over the years. So all the crew knew, everybody knew who Paul Jackson was, and not that they didn't have enormous respect and work hard for Ed, but they all worked 1,000 times harder when Paul appeared on the set, which was very amusing for us.
Everyone was a lot more scared. Because he's a bit notorious, but he can possibly have a temper. I've never seen him actually have a temper, but probably that's the best thing, to have a reputation that you've got a temper, and then you don't even have to lose your temper because you've got the reputation.
At the time, you've got to imagine Paul Jackson was basically the god of comedy. This is like, this is like sort of Michael Jackson. He was you had Michael Jackson and you had Paul Jackson.
Ed was ill and Paul came in and thought he did a great job, but frightened the life out of everyone before I know, do you know what I mean?
Suddenly the crew and admin staff doubled. I thought, hang on, I've not seen him, all these weeks. And, there were people sort of, dicing with death, hanging off the gantry, sort of saying, hello, Gov, I can get a light in here for you if you want. This sort of stuff was going on. And, the effect that the great Paul Jackson has on cast and crew alike is something special.
I swear to this day that I saw a technician pulling a nail out with his teeth. I'll fix that, Paul, no problem. Knocking it in with his bare hands to rebuild the set just the way it should be.
I think Danny might have chosen his first morning of all mornings to be late, which, punctuality and Danny John Jules.
That was wonderful. Danny has a problem with time. But I mean, I think I put it down to his exposure to science fiction. That time isn't a simple linear experience, particularly for Dan. It's a sort of hybrid wibbly-wobbly thing that's swirling in space.
A Danny story, which as he walked into the studio on that day, he started walking past, carpenters and guys building the set, and he said there was a strange air about the whole place. He said carpenters were banging nails in with their heads. And he thought, what's going on here? And then it became apparent Paul was back.
I got to Shepperton a little tardy and sort of walked in, thinking, I can whitewash Ed anyway. So I kind of think, Ed's all right. He'll shout, just, but he'll be all right after 1 minute. But got in there, and the first thing I heard was, my God, where have you been? Paul's directing. Ed's sick. And I'm like, what?
And that particular day, unfortunately for him, he was late on a shoot day, which actually, to give him his due, he never was. It was rehearsals Dan used to roll up a bit late for. But when we were actually shooting and when we were on camera, he was never late, except that day, which was a bad move.
Danny's comedy timing has always been perfect. And there was nothing funnier than him being late with Paul.
So I walk onto the studio floor and Paul's in there and he's looking like this, he's rolling up his sleeves going, it's great, innit? I haven't directed for 7 years. You certainly know your friends are, didn't you? Hey, what was it? Dead cow in the road?
So Danny kind of walks on going, hi everybody, on the day that the boss man is in. And I mean, he would have got a ticking off from Ed quietly in the background, but he got a very quiet ticking off from Paul Jackson, but right in the middle of the set where everyone could see. Come here, Dan, come here. You're late for me on the one day. All we could hit, and I was very near, but all I could just, still love you, do your job. And Danny was kind of,
thanks, Dan, thanks for your help. Oh, but Danny, I've never seen, Danny went white. Danny Jules went white.
You just don't know where to look after that because, Paul's a stickler for, being on time and being ready to go. So, there he is, as he said. He hadn't directed for 7 years. There he is in Shepperton, taking over from Ed at the the sound of a phone call, and he's there before me.
An action no longer leads to a consequence.
So what is it?
I think we've experienced this period of time before, sir.
Only joking.
And that one.
If it was only 2 lines, it was all right. It was when it was like 15 lines, we'd had to move and then we'd suddenly be sitting in different places and look at each other. And
we'd stop, then we'd go to the next bit and go to the next bit and all that kind of stuff. And it was all, And all very much, you have to think about it, you have to concentrate on it. And when you work with people who, I'd just say concentration's not their forte. You just start to think, oh, this is going to take forever.
The audience find it very funny when the cat just asks the same question. I don't know why, but all my scenes where he's asking those questions or repeating the same thing over and over again, they just find it funny.
But on the night, he's always on the money. You've got to give him that. He's like a consummate professional once the cameras are rolling, you know.
So what is it? Oh, someone punch him out.
And it's that kind of comedy of repetition, which you think you reach that point where no, don't repeat it 3 times, repeat it 9 times, and then it becomes very, very funny. No, it was great.
They were trying to work out how they could make me sound and look intelligent. This is for Holly, not personal, obviously. So they thought a bald cap with little round glasses, little John Lennon glasses and a bald cap, because that's obviously a sign of intelligence. And they thought I looked quite good in it, so they didn't do it.
We tested with a bald cap, and we did a plasticised makeup on her as well to make her look different. But that was basically it.
So then they were thinking all these different things, whether I'd speak differently, which I do a bit, I speak quicker. In the end, it was just slicking my hair back and having like a quiff thing, which I quite like that, actually.
And sometimes, as I say, these ideas sound good, and then when you actually test it, it's, you know, it's somehow, it isn't always funny, or it changes the course of it, the look of it too extreme.
I'm a computer with an IQ of 12,000. You don't seem to understand. I know the meaning of the universe.
The White Hole episode, I got a change of costume, though nobody'd notice it. Instead of a black polo neck jumper, I had a blue polo neck jumper, because that means that you can then transfer it onto whatever background you want, because I was then floating around the spaceship.
How long now?
Nearly there, Hall. Just a couple of minutes to load the circuits and, I don't know, maybe a minute to finalise the connection.
That's just 3 minutes then.
Directing a floating head, technically, is easy. That's the easiest thing you can do. But it was trying to get, I mean, the difficulty is then you have just got a floating head, and so everything, the onus is on the performance. She can't move, she can't do anything, she can't sort of hide behind a corridor, she can't run, you know. It's just the head. And so it's really, you're at the mercy of the dialogue and the performance, and both were fine, both were great.
If you'll allow me, sir, as one mechanical to another, he'll understand me. Now, you listen here.
I like Talkie Toaster. I've always wanted a toaster that talks to me. Sad, isn't it?
It wasn't too much of a double act with Talkie Toaster, because I couldn't see him, you know, because I always sit there with the camera right in my face and bright light right in my face, and he was over another side of the studio being Talkie Toaster, just, you know, talking into a mic.
We already had a previous toaster, which was very successful, John Lanahan. You know, then it was like, but everybody loves the toaster, they're not gonna get into someone else, even if it is David Ross.
I was slightly anxious about meeting because I thought, oh God, maybe he's really bitter and he thinks I've stolen his part. And he was so happy that I was doing that part.
Made a great talkie toaster. He's mad as a box of frogs. I remember jumping on the table in rehearsals and saying, come on, hurry up. Started doing this kind of mad dance. I've got to get to Manchester and all this kind of stuff.
Can I ask just one question?
Of course.
Would anyone like any toast?
Bingo! Down there. They've dished into the drink. I'm bailing out, computer.
But Ace, it's a suicide mission.
I caused the smash, should apologize. Only manners. Bring her round for another pass.
Please, Ace, don't go. I love you.
Chris did speak to us, and he was sort of, he'd had git overload. And he just said, it was really quite sad. I would just really like to play, you know, a kind of like a normal, nice guy character. And we went, Chris, that won't be funny. And he just went, well, you know, I'm not making a big deal out of it. But you could see there was a real kind of, you know, yearning and a sadness for something more wholesome and heroic. And then that really started the whole thing off was, hey, you know, we could do that. We could write Chris a heroic role, and I'm sure he'd be great. And sure enough, you know, that's what happened.
Well, I've said many times, you know, that it's my favourite of all the episodes. Obviously, for Rimmer, there's a great opportunity to play Ace Rimmer and normal Rimmer.
Well, Ace Rimmer, you know, as it suave, sophisticated man about town, James Bond sort of in the future, sort of. We took all those. I mean, it's basically a sort of jodhpurs and flying jacket. Just happens to be out of gold leather.
As soon as I saw it, I thought, I know Chris will do this justice. This will be great, and he did. He was fantastic at it. You know, Chris was born to play Ace Rimmer.
Chris developed the voice, the character, and you know, he's the only one that could wear, you know, gold riding boots and matching helmet, and remain quite butch.
Holly didn't actually meet Ace Rimmer. In that episode, I would have just been Melly, I think, and maybe I would have come back at the end. And I thought, well, where would Holly be? And they said, well, it doesn't really matter. And I went, oh no, no, I need to know where Holly would be. And I said, why doesn't she just see Ace Rimmer and faint? So then we did the faint thing.
Who's the deeply delicious, stunningly gorgeous computer?
Holly.
Actually, to be honest with you, there's a little bit of a sort of annoyingness, well, quite a big deal of annoyingness in Ace Rimmer's character, but Chris took that and still played the heroic part really well.
To play Ace in Dimension Jump was a great relief, you know, it was just sort of a whole pent up of playing two complete anal failures, you know, was just to be able to suddenly play someone who is loved and is brilliant at everything was just gusto. And that wig, I always remember that wig was just the best wig I've ever worn, you know?
It was a sort of a 70s idea, you know, that 70s thing of David Cassidy type swishy hair, sort of California type hero. And when we went for the wig fitting, we tried on various different, you know, styles. And, you know, it was funny how, I don't know, he'll probably say this is rubbish, but when he put on a sort of a flowing-ish wig, you know, he just suddenly transformed and went, you know, all this, you know, flicky stuff.
It was fairly gutting that, you know, not only has this guy been dead for like for 3 million years, and yet he gets laid more than Lister, who's alive. Then he gets to be a superhero, you know. He gets to be Indiana Jones crossed with James Bond. He gets to be amazingly good looking, amazingly charismatic, have awesome hair, and do all these superhero things. And I'm playing a mechanic called Spanners. It's like, I really, really knew I'd annoyed him again that week.
When Ace comes back in a later series, the wig just wasn't right. It was more like a thatch. It looked like a wig. It sort of didn't move much, you know? But the one in Series 4, I could walk down the corridors here in Shepperton, and people who I'd known for years, like Paul Jackson, just would glance at me and then walk on as if to say, oh, I've not seen that lighting engineer before. Who's he, you know? And then suddenly you turn around and think, my God, that's Chris in the Ace wig, you know? It really did have that effect, and it was fun wearing it. And then apparently it was stolen. According to Andrew, it was stolen at some point, that wig, so it must have been a good wig.
The original one, yeah, went missing, which we ended up, because as I say, we had to reuse, because Ace came back, and we had to get it made again, and we never tracked down. I don't know, my theory is maybe Chris has got it.
It was very hard getting the wig back off him. In fact, I think the wig disappeared. In fact, I think he's still got the wig now and wears it frequently at home. I wouldn't be surprised.
What's your favourite music, Dave? Keep your spirits!
On the side of Starbug, up a little ladder, and when they were trying to mend it, and it was genuinely freezing cold, and it had to be a storm scene, and they're up there, they've got a wind machine from both directions, really freezing cold anyway, and the people are throwing buckets of water all over them, and I think they probably did slightly chilled buckets of water as well, just to keep it real, yeah.
We had all this water being hurled at us, you know, with a Volkswagen wind machine, you know, which is quite a powerful amount of water coming straight at us, you know. And I I remember at one point I wanted to shout out, all right, just because I'm playing it doesn't matter to mean that we are indestructible and we aren't going to drown and you can chuck anything you want at us.
Chris was moaning about it. He goes, it's the last time, I'm not doing it anymore. And I think they caught me on the mic saying, oh, shut up, Chris, we're supposed to be space heroes. But it was uncomfortable and absolutely freezing. And they're firing these water cannon at us. And every time Chris went to speak, it wanted to go right down his mouth.
I don't know if they did it on purpose or not, but every time Chris turned his head to say something, he just got a bucket of water in the face.
I was just inhaling and about to say a line when I got a full gob of water, and it seems strange to say it, but I felt like there was a possibility of drowning at that point. Do you know what I mean? Because it did feel quite dangerous what we were doing, so we had to sort of go like that, to sort of breathe in and then speak.
That wasn't very popular at all. Lots of people got very upset and wet and cold and not nice, not nice.
I think me and Chris had a very sort of edgy relationship at that stage, you know, which helped the characters in many ways. It came across on screen anyway. It helped it come across on screen because, you know, on screen we're protagonists. You know, we wind each other up, and in real life, me and Chris we jarred along a lot in this sort of period between 2, 3, 4, and 5. Me and Chris really had a very uncomfortable relationship. Do you know what I mean? And which comes across on screen, which works for the show. But I feel much better about it now. We have a much closer, more sort of friendly relationship now, and based on sort of mutual respect, I suppose. I don't think we had that back then, you know, and, which really worked for the show. But like, so we'd wind each other up, you know, and with him going, throwing his toys at the pram, going, oh, I'm not doing it again, it's the last one. Shut up, we're supposed to be space heroes, you know. We were just like, we're like man and wife, you know what I mean? We knew that we were going to be locked on this bloody spaceship forever, you know, the whole of our adult life, do you know what I mean? Was going to be spent at Red Dwarf conventions.
Look, I'll tell you what we'll do. Sorry, old chum, no option.
I mean, that's a joy of working with Chris, is his precision as a performer. It's a joy to work with that, because I'm a sloppy performer, I'm sure, and a bit wobbly and kind of crash into things. And Chris is so precise, and his timing is so spot on.
You want to get it as precise as possible without actually, you know, making contact, you know. And I aim to be equally as complimentary to him on his reaction, which I think in many ways is more important than the punch, you know.
And that punch took me by surprise. I mean, it was so quick. You go, yes, well, I'm going to have one thing, bang! No, I do remember that very well. And I had a very restricted space to fall in, because that was done in the cockpit of Starbuck, so I had to be really careful where I fell, because there were kind of bits of wood and angle iron and camera stands right behind me, so I had to sort of fall there, which luckily we did.
If you're interested, I'll be in my quarters, covered in maple syrup.
I got to play someone else as well, Melly, with arms and legs and a different hairstyle. That was my hair as well. People always think these things are wigs. People often thought the Holly hair was a wig, but no, I've had this, I mean, my hair was like this before I did Red Dwarf. I don't know if it had been different. I don't know if Holly would have been different, or if it had to have been cut like this, or no idea. Actually, I did a gig once, and this bloke came up to me afterwards and said, oh, I'm glad I've met you and seen you live, because I used to think you were Norman Lovett in a wig.
I was absolutely determined that we'd see her legs, so I put her in a skirt. And also Robert was in that civilian sort of look, but it was that sort of futuristic office wear, but I wanted that slightly sort of Blade Runner 1940s pencil skirt, heels, and it was our one opportunity for Hattie to prove that she's not just a head.
I got to know what it was like to actually go for a costume fitting and wear an outfit, and yeah, that was good.
How's little Tommy?
He's pulled through. Be on his feet in no time, thanks to you. Sitting by his bedside day after day, night after night, holding his hand, reading him stories.
Originally, Danny's part in Dimension Jump was supposed to be a kind of slobby, down-and-out cleanup. But then we wrote that, but then when we got to kind of rehearsals, we realised that it was a kind of, well, it was a negative stereotyping thing, and we didn't want to go down that route, and so we changed it then to a padre, which in a way I think was more interesting for Danny and kind of more charming as well.
Everyone just thought, well, especially me and Danny, just thought that, you know, it'd be nice if Chris is going to be a superhero, it'd be nice for Danny if he could be a more positive black role model than a slobby clear. And then the guys sort of said, yeah, fine.
Well, when Queeg, you know, we end up cleaning the floors and all of that in the overalls and that, you know, we've actually been through those kind of characters anyway. You know, there's me and Craig on our all fours, the two black guys in the show cleaning the floor, but the black guy is the one that told them to do it.
Sometimes you just don't think about these things, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, you know, it's easy to say, okay, let's flip it. Rimmer's a git in real life, let's make him a superhero. The cat's super cool in real life, let's make him a slob. But there are sort of other implications that sometimes you might need to think about that perhaps the lads hadn't sort of thought about it, not consciously, and at least they're certainly not racist, you know. But it was a good debate.
It's ridiculous because we had the most politically correct show on the telly anyway.
It's a top-rated BBC sitcom where two of its leading participants are of colour, and the colour of their skin is never mentioned. Race is never an issue. It kind of says that in the future, you know, well, once we came from Africa, one day we'll come from everywhere, you know, and well, it's all just like this melting pot, and race won't be an issue in the future. And I think that's one of the sort of good sort of things that comes out of Red Dwarf, you know.
Colour has never been mentioned in 52 shows. I mean, what more do they want?
When people think about Red Dwarf, they don't even think I'm watching a sitcom with two white guys and two black guys and a white woman on the telly. It doesn't even, you'd never describe it like that.
If it was the latest drama, you know, the latest £10 million drama and the black guy was the cleaner, I mean, you know, then you could sort of look at it and think, oh, you know, come on, you know, let's make him in the window cleaner, you know, something different, you know, but in Red Dwarf, no one would have batted an eyelid.
Well, if it was a sitcom set in a shoe shop, it would be the two black guys and the two white guys, and you know there would be all that kind of racial pressure, which I think is the real strength of the show. It's great. It's never referred to.
Two black guys into anything else on television, and they'd be constantly discussing their role in society and the fact that, you know, they're black and stuff like that. And I hate that kind of television. Do you know what I mean?
If there was a cat priest, you know, that would have been him. You know, kind of happy-go-lucky with the pipe, West Indian.
It was such a sweet character. It was like, oh, you know, oh, little Chillum, come on to me, you know, and it's all that kind of, with the pipe and the grey hair. I mean, I'm not sure of the history of which inspired which, but I've certainly seen Danny do a kind of delightful old Jamaican gentleman type character before we did that. And I would think there was, you know, I mean, that was the thing with Rob and Doug. They would watch us very carefully, and we weren't aware of it at the time, but we'd be sitting at lunch doing sort of silly, you know, asking about, and Dan would probably go, me chillin', come over on the Sunday and have the lunch, you know, or whatever it would be. My classic Jamaican. And I think they would have seen that and gone, oh, wait a minute.
It totally sounded different, you know, as far as accents go in the show. You know, it was such a different sounding accent that had been on Red Dwarf before.
I know this probably won't interest you, but I'd hate myself for the rest of my life if I didn't at least suggest it.
Suggest what?
If you're interested, I'll be in my quarters at lunchtime, covered in Tarama salata.
I didn't mind that one though, because I had big eyebrows. I had really, really big stuck-on eyebrows. I mean, they took a hell of a long time to stick on. The eyebrows, I'll be covered in Tarama salata. Oh, that was great fun doing that show. It was really good.
Well, some people might say it's that devilishly brave and handsome guy in the cockpit that did it.
This is a grown-up job in theory, and we're all dressing up in silly costumes and doing these silly one-liner gags, but it was great fun. And Chris, as Ace Rimmer, was, you know, the first time I saw him with that wig on, and it just affected his whole personality. He just couldn't help it. He became cooler. Even, you know, having a cup of tea, the way he held the tea was like with a little bit more certainty.
Where's my what a guy line? Because everyone had a what a guy line. So I thought, how badly could I have done it that they cut it out? How badly can you say, what a guy? I'll try and say it now as Melly. What a guy. What a guy.
It wound up with Ace Rimmer being covered in kippers. You're right. And I think we shot it and we did the freeze frames and we did everything so that it really would become the end of the episode. And then we cut it.
Ready? I'll smoke him a smegging kipper.
It was in the edit, and we were able then just to come up with a Hammond organ idea, which everyone kind of, Ed and Rob, you know, we all thought it was a stronger ending, and that's how it wound up.
What the?
Susan! So long, suckers.
See, it's not one of the fans' favourite episodes. In fact, it's really, you know, low down on the sort of enjoyment scale from the feedback I've had of fans. Whereas I think it's one of my favourite episodes. Some classic scenes in it. When Caligula comes through that door, what a scene! And every time the cat pisses him off, he says, "Shut up," and then slaps me.
Silence, scum!
Shut up! I think what the fans' problem was is that this wax world very much looked like a park in West London, and which is because it was.
It wasn't particularly spacey, that episode. I admit that, but you know, Queen Victoria with a machine gun, Hitler, you know, vomiting milk. Come on, this is good stuff.
I know it's not one of the most popular Red Dwarfs so far, but that may turn around in time to come, you know. Because I think it was special on many levels. It looked at it on one level, it's just silly, you know, but from our point of view, it was great to have all those actors and impersonators imaginatively used, you know.
Hang on, someone's being brought out. They're tying him to a stake. It's Winnie the Pooh. What? Winnie the Pooh, I swear. He's refusing the blindfold.
You can tell when something's going to work really well. Is you can rehearse it and you just see Craig doing it and you go, that's going to be fine. You don't need to see Winnie the Pooh. You just need to hear about it.
We don't like existentialists around here. And we certainly don't like French philosophers poncing around in their black polo necks, filling everyone's heads with their theories about the bleakness of existence and the absurdity of the cosmos. Clear?
To walk the line, one of the best scenes, the most memorable, enjoyable scenes in the history of the whole set of series, you know. God, Gandhi, give me 5, give me 50 or whatever it was. Yeah, I mean, that was a fantastic fun to do, you know.
Hey, buddy, we just, you know...
Silence, scum! Will you not sink to your knees and bow in the presence of the Emperor Caligula?
Tony Hawk's doing Caligula, that scene was so hard to keep a straight face. It really, that was the hardest time I ever had, keeping a straight face.
They were quite loyal to me, actually, you know, the Red Dwarf team and Rob and Doug, and I think they'd sort of think, well, what can we find for Tony in this series? And they were looking through, they needed to cast, and they decided that actually I looked a bit like Caligula, rather tragically. So I think they just were looking at it and they thought, bloody hell, he looks a bit like Tony Hawk's. So they thought, well, may as well get Tony Hawk's to play him then. And me being Tony Hawk's, I turned up and did it.
We used to call him the fifth dwarf, or was the fourth dwarf at the time. Yeah, he'd always, in series 1, 2, 3, and 4, he was in every one of those series, playing a variety of roles.
I was in a toga and everything, and a big wig and stuff. It's one of those things where it's just one scene, and then I think we did it in Shepperton Studios, and you rehearse it a week, and you know it backwards and upside down, and then, you know, just before you go on this scene, you just think, oh God, what if I forget it all? It's an absurd thing you do. But we got through it all, I think, in one take. I don't remember it being a nightmare.
He's just got a silly voice. I'm sorry, Tony, but he has a silly voice. It's a real comedy voice, you know. And he's always made me laugh. Always made me laugh. Even when he was just doing stand-up stuff, like, you know, singing about coming from Swindon and things like this.
And Abraham Lincoln was so energetic. It was like, me and Craig, it was like being in a gale force wind. Every time he opened his mouth, he was Jack Claff, top, you know, real big Shakespearean actor, playing Abraham Lincoln, sort of just came in, storming in. We were like, God, are we doing enough in this scene?
All our best warriors are gone, man. John Wayne, Sir Lancelot, Joan of Arc, Nelson, Wellington, hell, baby, even Doris Day.
Sergeant Presley. Okay, boys, reach for the sky. Let me see them understains. That line is all-time classic line. And the song, you know, the, we are, me, I mean, Arnie Rimmer's Death Machine.
Arnie Rimmer's Death Machine!
Arnie Rimmer's Death Machine. That was a classic with the white suit and combat boots.
Clayton Mark, yeah, nearly stole the show.
Oh, you've been a wonderful prisoner, you really have. Oh, he was brilliant. Another one, mad as a box of frogs. Mad as a box of frogs. But a lovely bloke to work with. And what an Elvis. Probably the best Elvis impersonator.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
The star of the show, being an Elvis fan, was Elvis. I mean, everything he said, basically, I was just, you know, corpsing left, right and centre. And the theme tune sung by him at the end was brilliant, you know.
I think Elvis had to, you know, which of course I didn't do a thing. He turned up like that.
We supplied the sergeant stripes.
He was definitely kept us all amused, or bemused.
I had a glut of choice during Meltdown. I could sit there with Queen Victoria or Marilyn Monroe or Laurel and Hardy and Father Christmas or anybody I fancied, really. Just swan around all of them. I think I chatted to Marilyn Monroe most of the time.
It was an interesting edict to try and get all those people together, working away.
We were given a list of everyone that was there, from Elvis to Mother Teresa to whoever. We hired lots in. I think we hired Hitler and so on and so forth. I remember Jill, my then assistant, sewing blue ribbon on white sheets the night before we filmed to make a Mother Teresa.
Standing with the woman who played Queen Victoria, as she fired I don't know what, Thompson submachine gun with blanks, but extremely loud. I mean, painfully loud in a contained room. You know, it was deafeningly loud. And she pulled the trigger once, and it just fired one shot. She kind of dropped the gun. I went, that's. So we put earplugs in, because she was in her 80s, I think, the woman who played it. And she stood there. She's got to give her a due. She was very game for it. And this thing, you know, the shells firing out, big sparks, big flames coming out of it. I mean, very scary thing to be near, even if you're pointing it at someone else.
I'm watching you, Gandhi.
We were very concerned because we had this old guy who came in to play Gandhi, and it was something like 6 below freezing. It was so cold. We were filming outside in this field, and they were all being blown up. And this poor chap, he came in, and he couldn't stop shaking. He was so cold, and I was so worried. I went to the AD and said, look, I think, you know, he'll not survive. So they actually recast. They sent him home. He got paid, bless him. He must have been about 95, but he was so thin and so small, and I just thought he'd die. So they recast somebody else, because he was only in a loincloth and a pair of specs.
It's frightening. There's an awful lot of people that actually, you know, dress like that in the outside world and just came in and do it for a living. So actually, there's a lot of them I didn't have to do much makeup on at all, but I'll, you know, take the credit.
All the people charging across the grubby field just down the road from Shepperton, such a glamorous location, freezing cold, running around in kind of full-length Indian saris, getting blown up.
All the lookalikes were running across the field, and that was just hysterical, actually, because a lot of them, you know, maybe they just, you know, opened shops or did, you know, hung around at places. They hadn't really been used to running across the field with explosives going off near them. It was like they were genuinely shocked, and some of those explosives looked quite dramatic. There was a run across this field, freezing cold as it always was, because we recorded October, November, December, just running across with explosions and stuff.
It was utter chaos when we did it, and it still looks like utter chaos, yeah. The idea was, Rob Grant said, you know, wouldn't it be funny if people exploded? and just sort of disappeared. And I think we probably borrowed that technique from Python.
Smoking boot is always good for a laugh, yes.
Between series 1 and 2, I stopped smoking, so my weight increased quite considerably. If you careful Crichton observers can see that Crichton develops slightly larger girth as the decade wears on.
It must be a prototype. I found it in the research labs down on Z-Deck. I managed to cobble together the missing circuitry, and it appears to be fully functional.
When we started filming, well, everything was made to fit at that time. And through the process of maybe on-site catering, I'm sure Robert will admit, sometimes actors do change shape when they're filming. It's strenuous, hard work, so too many sticky buns. So I think he put on a bit of weight, and subsequently it didn't do up properly, and I think kept popping undone. That's why it slopped up and down.
There were 2 costumes at that stage. There was one that was a complete moulded all-in-one lump with the monitor as part of it, and there was another one where the monitor was strapped on a strap, which wasn't quite big enough at that stage.
The chest monitor we did have a problem because it basically goes on it's one piece, but it connects up on the shoulder and at the side, and it was, at the time, it wasn't very sophisticated. It was all done with poppers and Velcro, and the problem is that any excess weight you carry, that Velcro doesn't stick, so it would sort of burst undone.
At the end of 90, by then I'd stopped smoking for a year, so it was kind of that first year of, I'll have another bit of lunch, I'll have the pie. It was a bit of that, there was a bit of porking out going on. So certainly I think your face is very quickly affected by that, so they would have done a new cast and a new mask would have reflected that slightly increased width.
There is a photo somewhere, and I think it's in one of the Red Dwarf manuals, and there's a picture and there's this bit of white, and I've looked at it for years and gone, what's that? And I've realised it's actually gaffer tape.
What now?
Well, I suggest we start to run, sir. I suggest we ambulate as fast as the local gravity will allow.
Why?
Because of them, sir. Sir?
I don't know where the Japanese movie monsters came from. That was something some researchers did some extremely hard work on, and they are nothing to do with me.
That was supposed to be aired during the Gulf War, 1991. And there you go again, the PC gone nuts. Because the war was on, they didn't want to show this American general kicking butt, slaughtering all these waxworks dummies. Yeah, right.
It went out last because I think they thought it might offend people, seeing Marilyn Monroe running on a battlefield, gunning down Abraham Lincoln.
Stuff like that really annoys me. Messing with schedules just because it's because life is going on. I mean, I do a radio show, for the BBC. Now on 6 Music, and a good friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, Edwin Starr, died recently, and I wasn't allowed to play his masterpiece War because the second Gulf War was going on, so I couldn't do a tribute to Edwin Starr, whose amazing song War, an anti-war song. I couldn't play it on the BBC because there was a war going on.
It's when you're talking about real war and people losing lives, then I can fully understand that it should be, if not moved to the end of a run, just taken out completely.
The whole thing was completely screwed around with, and I don't know, looking back at it, you think, well, that was completely pointless. There wasn't really any point. Because I don't think people are going to watch Red Dwarf and go, do you know, I think that's a direct reference to the war, and I'm really upset about that. They're just going to go, it's Red Dwarf, and they recorded it last year before there was a war.
I think people should be less anal about that and just say, well, look, it was shot in all honesty and good faith. Okay, Invincible have taken it, but this is the episode they shot. Rather than saying, oh no, we can't put it out while the war's going on. So you can put it out after the war's gone on. I don't get the difference, you see.
Things that aren't political when they're filmed or when they're written can become political afterwards. So when we looked at it again this time, when the Iraq war was on, you kind of thought, yeah, it is a bit dodgy, I suppose, in that context, but not in itself. And it's an anti-war episode.
Rewatching it recently, there was something that, I can't remember what it was now, but the character said that it was almost lifted out of a debate that we'd heard that lunchtime between, you know, our Prime Minister and the US Secretary of State for Defence.
Just because we're in a war doesn't mean that we're not all anti-war, you know? I mean, no one says, oh, let's go to war, you know? You go to war because you've got yourself into a political situation where you feel as though you have to, but, like, I'm sure everybody in their right minds would rather find a diplomatic solution than going to war. And, like, you know, I think Wax World was an absolute excellent sort of anti-war message, you know, and Lister's little speech at the end, you know, where, like, you know, they're free, they're all liberated, they're all dead, you know what I mean? And great speech. It's, you know, quite tearful, really.
I brought about peace. Peace, freedom and democracy.
Yeah, Rimmer, right, absolutely. Now all the corpses that litter that battlefield can just lie there, safe in the knowledge that they snuffed it under a flag of peace and can now happily decompose in a land of freedom. You smeghead.
Well, you know, by now it was like, I think we've really got a hit on our hands here, and this could go on and on. But, you know, I think we were convinced by then.
It's one of those things that while you're filming it, you think, oh my God, I'm never going to do this again. But at the end, you think, I really enjoyed that. There's something a bit sick about Red Dwarf, definitely.
It's futuristic and comedy. And I think you can't get too sophisticated with them, otherwise you lose that integral part.
The creature known as Cat. Clearance granted.
Hey, I hear they do good bread and water here, buddy.
Season 4 was a really interesting one because each show cost about £250,000 to make, and we came in under budget by £150,000, which was unbelievable. And we were told after 3 shows that we couldn't have any more sets. And if you look at that black and white set in Justice, I mean, that probably cost 3 and 6pence. And at the end of the series, they were going, hey, get a taxi home. Do you want a curry? Have 4 curries. You want some lager, guys? You guys have worked so hard. Have a curry. Did we mention the curries and the lager? Oh, yeah, well, have more. Take 4 taxis home. You know, desperately trying to spend this underspend. Which was, you know, I remember that so clearly, thinking, oh, all that money could have gone on screen.
Objection overruled.